Welcome everybody to this Office of the Comptroller's Candidates Forum being hosted here at the Downtown Cultural Arts Center, one of the premier event and performance venues here in Baltimore City. I will be serving as your moderator. My name is Roberto Alejandro, reporter with OnBackground.com. And we are joined today by Mr. Mike King, candidate in the Democratic primary, which will be held on April 26th, for the Office of the Comptroller here in Baltimore City.
Yes, thank you.
I'd like to give you an opportunity to begin by just introducing yourself and speaking a little bit about why you're running for the Office of the Comptroller.
Sure, yeah, thank you. And again, thank you for the venue. I'm running for Comptroller because for too long now, decades, the city of Baltimore has not held its agencies and its capital spending accountable for how it's using taxpayers' dollars. And my platform is clear. I will initiate and conduct annual agency audits, performance and fiscal audits, of all 55 city agencies without increases to the comptroller's budget, and have those in place and working for the citizens of Baltimore within my first 3 years. How I plan to accomplish that is by leveraging the expertise and the knowledge I've gained over 10 years in the private sector, working as a financial operations manager and director, overseeing groups that perform audits, that are impacted by audits, as well as working as a financial fraud investigator and using those unique skills that I've acquired over years to ensure that our books from our agencies and how our spending is being made, that they're correct, and that the report is working then to improve the services and the effectiveness and the efficiencies of our agencies.
Now, you mentioned wanting to conduct annual agency audits and doing so without increasing the budget of the Office of the Comptroller. Speak a little bit about how you plan to go about doing that.
Sure. So the fiscal year 2016 budget for the Office of the Comptroller is it's $17.3 million. Of that, 60% right now is being spent on the municipal telephone exchange. So, as people are maybe aware, or hopefully are aware, the municipal telephone exchange has been sort of a thorn in the side of city government for a long, long time now, almost a decade. It's an antiquated service, and there have been discussions about finding a vendor to take over that service. Number one, to just make it more effective, bring it into the 20th century, let alone the 21st century. And then, of course, to reduce the costs of in terms of the amount that taxpayer dollars are going into this antiquated system. And what my plan is, within the first 6 months, push the politics aside, and we're going to get a vendor on the ground, get the approval through the Board of Estimates, and I'm going to have that then the service issue resolved by having that vendor then take over the municipal telephone exchange, and looking at records of vendor quotes that have been obtained in 2010, and then as recently as last year, looking at potentially saving $2 to $3 million within the budget, within the Office of the Comptroller's budget. That money then I'm going to leverage to improve and increase the resources of the Department of Audits. Currently, the Department of Audits has 38 full-time auditors, including support staff. The production of the auditors is between 10 and 20 audits a year. That number, I've heard that number several times, and I know that there's around 7 to 10 annual audits that are supposed to be performed each year now. But if you go to the Department of Audits website, for 2015, there's 3 audits reported for Enoch Pratt Free Library. That's it. So I know the libraries are essential to the city and as hubs for communities, but there's other agencies that we should be auditing. So my plan is, number one, do a performance evaluation for the Department of Audits. I don't think that's ever been done. I want to see if the production level, that's the other thing. Under the city charter, the Board of Estimates and the Comptroller, those two entities are the only entities that have the authority to request and require audits to be performed. My opinion is those requests aren't being made. And as your comptroller, I promise you those requests will be made on getting audits performed in the city again.
Now, you mentioned that we are not currently auditing at the level that you're suggesting that we ought to be.
Sure.
How long do you think it will take you to get the Department of Audits to the point where they can conduct annual agency audits?
I think that I can't put the cart before the horse with that. Initially, I want, within my first 3 months in office, that's when I'm going to conduct the performance evaluation. And I want to make sure that the people and the resources are in place to have an output of audits that is going to be required to do annual full agency audits. Now, from the private sector, I think that it could already be there. Now, if I find that it's not, and to your point, how long are we looking at? I'm giving myself a 3-year window because I don't believe in continually making excuses or continually saying, well, next year or the next time in the budget we'll have more audits. I'm going to give myself 3 years. If I can't make the promise, or if I can't keep the promise that I'm making to the citizens of Baltimore to have annual agency audits within 3 years, I won't run again. I won't run for comptroller again. That's how confident I am in my skills to make sure that the Office of Audits, or the Department of Audits and the Office of the Comptroller is working effectively and efficiently.
Let's speak a little bit about working effectively and efficiently. You mentioned the Board of Estimates, which is obviously a board that you would sit on as comptroller, but there are a lot of people who feel like, and including apparently most of our city council, that board is not running as effectively as it might. And there's concern that the mayor holds too much power. As currently constituted, the board has 5 members, the comptroller, the city council president, the mayor, and then the city solicitor and head of DPW, both of whom are appointed by the mayor. And so generally, since a majority rules on that board, the mayor gets what the mayor wants. In light of the fact that the city council has proposed to restructure the board to remove the head of DPW and the city solicitor, what is your position on that plan? Do you think that would be a useful way moving forward for the city?
First off, I want to say that I think any change to the current structure, I'm fully in favor of. Right now, of course, it is. There's too much power. It's weighted too heavily within one elected official. Now, having said that, though, ideally for me, I think we may end up having the same problems with having a 3-member elected board as what we're seeing now, where the mayor has essentially 3 votes. And what I mean by that is, I think it's with a tribunal like that, it's too easy then for potential conflicts of interest, whether it's campaign funding, contractors getting the ear of 1 or 2. I'm more of a fan of sort of spreading the responsibility. Ideally, if it was up to me, I would want where you have a revolving door in terms of city council representatives. So, I'd envision something where possibly every 6 months, you have a council member from districts, and you choose those districts by region. So I think a lot of the problems that we have, especially in capital spending, we're not looking at other parts of the city when we're making these decisions. And a lot of our city is being left in the dark, and they're not getting the funding that they need for structural and infrastructure improvements. What I'd like to have is, you're looking at region to region. So maybe it's the 2nd district councilman, and then you're looking at maybe the 10th. So they sit together, and that's additional 2 votes. That way, it's, I don't think, right now under the current, you you can't have that because they're appointed positions. If you have those 2 additional votes, so you remain 5, but they're elected officials, and they're elected by the people, and they're supposed to be the voice of those districts, I think we'd have a much more equitable Board of Estimates then.
Let me ask a question, because as comptroller, you would also sit on the Board of Finance. This is another 5-person board. You hold a seat. The mayor is president of the board, and the mayor has authority to appoint 3 other people to the board. Now, for those who aren't that familiar with our city's budgeting process, the Department of Finance, essentially in collaboration with agency heads, prepares the initial ordinance of estimates, which is our city budget. The Board of Estimates then approves that budget, or votes to approve that budget, and it is then given to the council, which has the ability to reduce or eliminate line items, but cannot add additional funding or other things, and otherwise basically has to give it an up or down vote. And so the mayor has an awful lot of authority because she controls the finance board, which oversees that initial budgeting process, and then she controls the Board of Estimates. Do you think that giving perhaps someone like the comptroller more authority over the finance board might be a way to balance the power the mayor holds on the Board of Estimates?
I do. But I'd also say this. I think that when you're choosing your comptroller, you need then to choose someone that's going to stand for the best interests of the constituents, the citizens of the city as well. That's the reason why the comptroller is an elected position in our city, is because it's supposed to be that third level of scrutiny against the mayor's office, the city council. Have we had that for 20 years? I don't know. But under my watch, though, we will. And to your point about more power for the Board of Finance, the Board of Finance, it's incredibly important too, because the Board of Finance then makes decisions around how we're potentially loaning capital money, how we're investing the city's money. We don't want issues where we're choosing poor investments and then we're taking huge losses. That's happened with us in the past. It's happened with other municipalities. And of course, all of that then plays into our overall bond rating. So it's incredibly vital. Now, and what I can say is that as a member of the Board of Finance, I'll be the voice coming from a banking and an investment background. I'll be that voice that's asking those questions around investments. We shouldn't have risk. We shouldn't be taking on risk when we're making investments with taxpayer dollars.
I've been remiss. Let me welcome those who are watching this streaming online from the Baltimore Election 2016 Facebook group. For those of you, if you have a question for Mr. King, you can ask it via the Facebook group, and we will present it to the candidate. You mentioned being someone who will have, or needing a comptroller who will have the best interests of the citizens in mind. And you've alluded to the distinction between financial and performance audits. Financial audits are making sure people are spending the money the way they say they're spending it. But the performance audit is a little different. It's looking at what they're spending it on and making sure those things are effective. But effective is one of those ambiguous terms that can shift depending on what your core concerns are, what you most think constituents need, or what you most think the city needs. So I wanted to ask, what standards or values would guide you in terms of determining whether a particular agency practice is being effective?
That's a great question. What you're looking at is uniform across. So my experiences in the private sector around performance audits, you're right. Effectiveness is a difficult thing to judge, and it changes. And those benchmarks that you want to hit, they should be changing all the time. But what you can evaluate on and make strong distinctions is whether agencies are following procedures, whether agencies are following protocols. One example, so the horrendous, the criminal acts that have occurred within the housing department and the housing authority regarding sex for services. that were being made, and there were complaints that were being made by residents of the government housing. Now, if we had annual audits, if we had people looking at records as they're coming in, would that, my feeling is, and perhaps I'm being optimistic, I think if you have the oversight in place, people think twice before they try to do something wrong, because they know that there's a good chance they're going to get caught. Not having anything like that in place, it's a free-for-all. Now, if we had those in place and those actions still occurred, we would have a why hasn't this been bubbling up? Why hasn't the correct procedure? What is the procedure around this? Why isn't that? And overall, especially with the performance side, audits are to make things better. That it's not about pointing out who's doing what wrong. It's about finding where we need to make improvements. And there's a lot of services that Baltimore City currently does that they're doing a great job. And I think there's a lot of agencies that are doing incredible things with very little funding. What an audit also finds out, as we see now with budgeting, that we need to cut after-school programs. Every year we seem to have to cut after-school programs. What an audit finds out is, hey, you know what? These after-school programs are working, okay? Let's not cut them. Now, Department of Transportation, this isn't working. So let's take some more money off of them. But we need to make sure that we're still giving money to the programs that work.
Now, you mentioned that the purpose of the audit is not to demonize an agency or demonize an agency head. But I could imagine, just as that question you asked, what is the procedure in XYZ case? There might be a lot of agencies who are not used to being audited, are maybe not even used to keeping books, for that matter. How are you prepared, or what would be your approach to dealing with an agency or agency head that is resistant to this process?
Sure, and absolutely. I fully anticipate that. I mean, some of our agencies haven't undergone a financial and a performance, or one or the other, for decades. So there's going to be a lot missing, and there's going to be a lack of knowledge, and there's going to be a lack of skill. What I want to do, and this is one thing that the incumbent's office, I don't think has ever done. What I want to do is, it's a partnership. So I want to create roles, whether it's in the office of the Comptroller or the Department of Audit, where essentially they're going to be interdepartmental analysts. And what they're going to do, they're going to work hand in hand with auditors and hand in hand with the staffs from the agencies to look at, okay, we've uncovered that you don't have the correct procedures in place for this. We're going to help you create those procedures. We're going to look at your charter. We're going to look at the city charter. We're going to find out what's required, and we're going to get that in for you. Same thing then with financial bookkeeping. If ledgers aren't being kept correctly or books aren't being kept correctly, I want to have people on the ground where it's a partnership. Because my office just saying, okay, you don't have this, that means nothing. We have to work together then, so then we have that benchmark set. Then the next year, if we do our jobs right, the next year, that's not a ding on the audit again. That's fixed, and now we can move on to the next thing.
It looks like we have some questions.
Do I have to move my car? Is that what that is?
Yeah, that's right. There's no parking around here, so.
Yeah.
And this is a good question. It's one I had on my paper myself. What agencies are in most need of audit, to your mind?
Well, I'll say this. So the quadrennial audits that were mandated in 2012, they picked supposedly the most important 13 agencies. And within that, of course, my thought is the Department of Public Works, just because of the budget the Department of Public Works has, as well as the web that it has throughout the city and the impact it has on everybody in the city. That's vital. That one should be performed, but again, though, we're only looking at 2013 numbers with the quadrennial audit. But Department of Public Works, I'll say this too, the police department. I think the police department needs to have an audit. and it needs to be done very soon. And of course, on my plate, I'm looking at agencies that we've decided there may be issues with, that we may have challenges with as a city, and our citizens are speaking up and saying there's challenges with them. The school system as well. And the fact that, whether the state conducts I believe it's every 6 year they do a full audit on that, and then they may do financial audits. I mean, the fact that we've lost, or the school system's lost $50 million before, it just sort of fell off a shelf, and we haven't asked further questions about that. I think that is a way that we're letting down our children, and we're letting down the citizens of the city. So that's my dream list, and that's what I'm going to work on as your comptroller.
Now let me ask about the police department and the school system particularly, because the police department is technically a state agency.
Yes.
And the school system is under state receivership.
Yes.
And so there could be some resistance and maybe even some legal arguments that you don't have the authority to do this. Now, the charter does give your office the authority to audit any monies that the city has spent.
Correct.
Now, a state agency might say the charter doesn't apply here.
Sure.
But how do you think, do you see the authority to audit those agencies, or at least through the money the city is giving directly to them?
I would say yes. So initially, the money that the city, taxpayer dollars that are going towards those agencies, that is where I can hit immediately. And if there was a legal argument against that, then I'd work then with our solicitor to figure out a way then that's not valid, because we should be able to track how our money's being spent. Now, the second piece to that, though, we're having a lot of the mayoral candidates are talking about expansion of their authority over the school system. At this time now, we're looking at further oversight of the police department, whether legal, in legal terms, or even from a community standpoint.
Sure,
okay,
absolutely.
I think me asking this and me wanting to do this, I think the citizens of Baltimore are asking for that. I think they want that done. So I'll be more than happy to sit in a room and fight and argue about why we need those done, knowing that the citizens of Baltimore want that as well.
It sounds like you're prepared to use the bully pulpit of the office, where, say, your limited power on the Board of Estimates or your limited power on the Board of Finance, might force you to run into a wall in terms of what you can do unilaterally. Do you feel like the bully pulpit is an appropriate tool to exercise as comptroller, or is that not appropriate for the office?
I'll say this, I think bully pulpit, I'd probably that's maybe too hard of a term. I would say that I would use the voice of the citizens, and I would make sure that, in the spirit of transparency, because that's severely lacking in the office and really across the city. For that transparency, I want to have a working relationship with the media. I want to have a working relationship with all the community associations throughout the city. I want to have a working relationship with the people that have been out there, the citizens that have been doing all of the heavy lifting for so long. I want to be working with them directly, and I want them to know that the office is working for them. Now, in terms of, I'm not, one thing that I've heard is coming in and understanding the power that this elected position, the comptroller, has, the authority that it has to work within the confines of the city charter, to whether it's auditing or potentially working on vacant property. I think all of the citizens, everyone that I've spoken to as I've been canvassing and attending forums, everybody's like, well, why isn't this going on? Why isn't this happening? I'm going to bring that to the office. I am going to work with everyone that I can work with, more people than I probably need to work with. My decisions on the Board of Estimates, I want, if there's capital spending being done that's going to impact Sandtown, I want to be able to meet with the elected officials that represent whatever district, whatever area all this spending's going on in. I want to talk with them. I want to find out before I cast my vote, why? Why should I vote this way? Why should I vote against this? And I don't think, I don't know for sure how that's been happening in the past, but that's what I'm going to bring to the role.
Let me just mention that that previous question from Facebook was asked by Mr. Nick Sheridan. Let me ask you a sort of balance of powers question and use the police department, a hypothetical performance audit of the police department. Generally, we would expect the mayor to sort of set the agenda for what policing looks like. But we have seen what happens when what the mayor or the police commissioner thinks policing should look like is very different than what the community does. And you've mentioned not wanting to use a bully pulpit, but the voice of the citizens.
Sure.
And at least last April, the voice of the citizens and the voice of the mayor were not in lockstep. And so if you were conducting a performance audit where you were looking at the effectiveness of practices, is it a sort of exercise that allows you to balance the authority of the mayor, or is that in some ways a usurpation of their authority, depending on how you fall on the performance issue?
Sure. So that's a great example. So looking at it that way, what you have with your audit findings, so you can give then suggestions, okay? Areas that then you see, well, look, there could be more work with this. So from a comptroller, because, you know, as the comptroller, and to make things reliable and valid, you know, you have to follow the procedures set up within the audits. So it's not completely just going in and saying, hey, you know, no, this needs to be done completely different. It's not that at all. From a performance perspective, if procedures, protocols, processes are being followed, you know, then when the audit, when it shows that, it's going to say no. You know, there's a 92% success rate with following practices for this. That's great. Now, what can be done, though, is sort of that extra piece, okay? And say, this is what's going, you know, this is great. You guys are following this. Speaking then with the mayor, giving the audit findings then, of course, to Board of Estimates, the council, and, you know, the police department, the commissioner, and saying, this is all working great. Maybe have a consideration towards this. Or this is what I'm hearing from the communities. This is an area that needs focus too. Maybe this is something we're looking at to implement over the course of the next year. So of course, there's boundaries, there's, you know, strength in what I can do as the comptroller. It's being able then to leverage the support and leverage the support I have from the constituencies then, or my constituency, to then hopefully help influence ways that agencies then are conducting their business.
Now let me just ask one more question related to the police department. The Board of Estimates oversees fiscal policy for the city and oversees expenditures. The current city council president, when it comes to the issue of police settlements, has generally held the position that the citizens of Baltimore City should not be on the hook for police abuse, especially when they've acted outside the scope of their authority in committing any particular act of abuse, and that officers should be held personally responsible. What considerations inform your approach to voting on excessive force-related settlements as a member of the Board of Estimates?
I know, well, first, I'm not an attorney, but having read how other municipalities handle that, I agree with the sentiment. I don't think that Baltimore City necessarily should be on the hook to pay out fees, costs, and, you know, for actions and criminal actions sometimes that are taken by the police force. Having said that, though, to put the onus on individual officers' heads, I don't know how that works either. I don't know how that plays out. And in all honesty, you know, what I would like to do is make it, instead of where we're averaging whatever 10 million a year that we're paying out, that we just don't have any more actions that are taking place by the police force where we're required then to make settlements. Now, that's the grandiose picture, I guess. But yeah, in terms of, yes, I wouldn't want the city to have to pay that, but I think it's too easy just to say, well, no, it's the responsibility of the police officers. I think there's too much, and there's much more that I need to understand about that before I make a decision on that.
So would you say a performance audit might be a better way of improving practices than something like this, a move like this from the Board of Estimates, refusing?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I think the performance audits as well, I think that they will help to reduce infractions like this. I think that a performance audit is going to show, look, from a public relations standpoint too, performance audits, especially with the police force, especially with the school system, okay? We're going to be able to say then what's going right and how we're making positive inflows within communities that, possibly they don't consider or haven't seen any, positive things from these entities. So with a performance audit, we can say, well, no, look, here's this. So there's definitely, it's the yin and the yang of it. There's good, and there's the ability then to find out what we need to work on.
Let me go back to a question related to your role on the Board of Finance. Article 2, Section 51 of the Charter grants the authority to the city to help residents of, quote, all income levels to finance readily their housing needs in Baltimore City, end quote. At least one city council candidate has suggested that the city pursue the creation of its own mortgage lending arm to support the homeowning aspirations of lower income residents. And there has also been talk from at least one mayoral candidate of establishing a city-controlled bank in order to save money on fees that the city otherwise pays to banks that hold its money on deposit. And the idea being that this would give the city greater control of the way Baltimore uses its own funds to spur community economic development, not simply economic development. Now, as Comptroller, you obviously sit on the Board of Finance, and which has the authority to determine which institutions hold city monies on deposit. It's not clear to me from my reading of the charter that the city has the authority to create a bank outright, but premising a mortgage lending institution on the ability to collect deposits in order to then lend money for the mortgages.
Sure.
Could be a path forward to achieving both. As a potential member of the Board of Finance, what are your thoughts on the idea of establishing a city-controlled bank to hold the city's money on deposit, a city-controlled mortgage lending institution, or both?
I think the idea of the city-run bank, that actually, I started talking, I heard about that. I've learned an awful lot of things that the city could be doing. This bank has continued to strive because it's not tied to, junk loans. It's not tied to any type of equity that's immediately impacted by how the market's conducting itself. And what it's doing then is focusing on fair lending practices. It's focusing on small person, like home ownership, but then business, creating businesses through business loans within the community. I understand, I recognize all of the incentives now the city does, especially with minority ownership. But the idea, though, is incredibly intriguing. If we could have a bank that also, I would want, if we were to go down that, and it'd be a lot of discussion, have to figure out then how to formulate it. But the idea to have, it'd almost be like almost like a city credit union, per se, where it's the bank and it's some type of mortgage. We're helping then citizens. We're able, they don't have to go through with mega conglomerate banks and potentially be denied because of whatever reason, as well as then we set a specific rate that coincides then with potentially the bond rating for the city. I am 100% in favor of looking at those ideas. And honestly, as a member of the Board of Finance and the Board of Estimates, because the Board of Estimates, I mean, you're going to be looking then potentially at capital funding with that as well. So the Board of Estimates is going to have to be on. Of course, everybody would have to be on board. That'd be a huge endeavor to do that.
Yeah.
Could it work? Maybe. I'm optimistic around that. If it did work, I mean, I could see incredibly beneficial things for areas of the city that can't get that financial assistance that they desperately need.
Let me just, because we're on this topic, ask one more question, then I'm going to get to this question from one of our online viewers. But the Board of Finance has the authority under the charter to issue certificates of indebtedness, which colloquially, though I'm sure you will correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just going to say bonds for,
Sure,
I think
yeah.
it sounds better to most people than certificates of indebtedness. Now, my experience has been that when the city issues such certificates, generally to fund some project or idea, they're designed with the intention of selling them to sort of larger scale investment funds, hedge funds, mutual funds that are kind of buying these in large amounts. But in a city that struggles with getting people involved in direct democratic processes, might issuing some version of a more consumer or resident-oriented certificate of indebtedness tied to projects designed for and in concert with the communities where they will be located be a way to increase civic participation by another means, as well as provide another revenue stream to the city?
Yes, and see, when you're talking about that, you know what pops in my head? I think you're giving the way that we perceive TIFs to work. And that's the way that a TIF should work. Now, whether or not they do, and again, because I'm running for Comptroller, TIFs require oversight. And what I've noticed with certain TIFs that have been issued from the city over the past 30, 40 years, past 20 years, excuse me, the oversight's lacking with the TIFs, and making sure that the requirements within the TIFs are being met then by whether it's the developer or the entity then that's going to benefit from the initial funding. But back to your initial question. Again, I think there's so much possibility in terms of what we can do. When you look at cities, and believe me, especially financially, Baltimore is, people may disagree with me, but I feel that Baltimore is in a much better spot than Detroit was before it dropped, okay? Than even like New Orleans before the Katrina and everything. I would make the argument, though, that we need to start looking at those cities. And we need to start looking at how they're rebuilding, because we're really in a spot right now where Baltimore needs to rebuild. And I think by looking at some of the things, these sort of out-of-the-box ideals in terms of financing areas that for too long it's been very difficult or they've been ignored in terms of getting financial funding. I think we need to look out of the box, and we need to start finding ways of getting money to these areas. But then, not just to give money, but to make sure that money is turning into positive results, through socioeconomic means, and that the people are really benefiting then from the funding.
Let me ask this question, which comes from Van Smith. How would you manage the Office of Real Estate? This was one of Pratt's first points of interest in the 1990s when she appointed Anthony Ambridge to run that office. We've heard little about it since.
That's a very good question. And that's actually, my focus is audits. We need that. But looking at the Department of Real Estate, I think talking with people don't even know that it's there. Let alone, what authority the the Department of Real Estate has. So the Department of Real Estate actually has the oversight over city-owned vacant properties. And one thing that I plan to do within my first years in office is to reduce the total number of city-owned vacant properties by 50%. And how I plan to do that, is by looking at using the charter. Under the charter, the Department of Real Estate can lease without any other authority, without any other requirement from Board of Estimates or anything, but can lease vacant properties or potentially then sell vacant properties that the city owns, that the city no longer needs, okay? So of course it's confirming that, that this shell is no longer needed by the city. Knowing that then, what I want to do is, I really like the idea of co-ops. I really like the idea of community-backed and community-grown financial investments. And looking at whether it's food deserts across the city, I think that's a great opportunity then for the real estate department to look at the Department of Real Estate to look at vacants that are within these food deserts, find community associations that there'd have to be requirements on that side. They'd have to be like 5013Cs. They'd have to have some backing as well. But work with the community associations to find out what is needed in your community. We're going to lease this property to you for $1 a year for the next 50 years. Work with it. But then the oversight comes in. You have, 18 months to get it to this. Enter into a contract with these community associations. Enter into a contract with not developers, but local investors, people that are in the communities, live in the communities, work in the communities. Enter into potential contracts with them to say, okay, this area, what's needed? Talk to the community association, what is needed in here? Maybe a community says, well, we just need green space. We need more green space. Okay, then here's your green space. We'll get this building knocked down, here it is. Not every community is going to need $300,000 townhomes. Some may. And not every community is going to need, whether it's like a food co-op, because they don't have a market for 20 blocks, or it's looking potentially at even housing, affordable housing, and even potentially like homeless housing as well.
I want to ask one question related to the Department of Real Estate, but just by show of hands, is there anyone in the audience here that would like to ask a question of Mr. King? All right, looks like I have the floor.
Thank you, yes.
So it seems to me that since we have control of these vacant properties, and a lot of these vacant properties are vacant homes, the city might be able to take advantage of its credit rating and finance the reconstruction of these homes at a rate that probably many regular citizens just wouldn't be able to do.
Sure.
And then find a way, much like you discussed, leasing for $1, find a way to get these homes into persons. Now, I want to sort of lean on your investment background. This might not be a way of getting a direct return in terms of we're going to collect interest on the same loan amount that we spent on this building, but it could be an investment more broadly speaking in terms of addressing a lot of the social issues which have their own related costs that are not insignificant, especially in this city, that occur when you have blocks and blocks of vacant housing, not to mention a large number of residents who don't have stable housing.
Yes.
You talked about outside of the box thinking. Does the city maybe need to be willing to take some risks where it might eat some upfront costs, understanding that the reduction in social costs is also a welcome investment return?
I think that's a very valid point. Yes, it can't all be bottom line dollars and cents. Yes, from a social benefit, from a social awareness standpoint, absolutely. And I wouldn't say that that's necessarily taking a risk. I think if you do it properly, if you know up front, look, this is what we're planning on doing, okay? One thing, I'd read an article, this was a few months ago in Utah. I can't remember, I think it's Salt Lake, but they had this novel idea for homeless, okay? They had this novel idea, well, why don't we just, the city, we have this apartment building that we own. Let's go ahead and fix it. We'll give all of them homes. We'll give them all apartments, okay? So I think initially it was like 75 or something like that they ran this pilot with or whatever. So they get them in there. They get them involved in vocational rehabilitation. Find out, a lot of these people, they have skills. And it's not just labor skills, or it's not just this type of skill. It's, a myriad of different jobs that they could work. Giving them a home and then giving them a little bit of a leg up, then they start automatically, and they're producing then, okay? So then they're out in the workforce, and they're proud because every night they're coming home to their apartment, and they're taking care of things. And they're looking then, a few years later, they're looking at, moving on to a new job, a promotion, whatever, what have you. Now, the city, and I believe, if I'm wrong, please let somebody on Facebook correct me, but I believe it was Salt Lake, but now they're looking at, that's an investment, It's not, now, I'm sure when they first did it, they had naysayers saying, okay, well, yeah, this is going to cost us X amount each year. Well, they broke it down, and then net gains, it was costing them in terms of homeless shelters and, potential issues with, like, policing within homeless districts and where a population of homeless was. It was costing them 3-4 times what it cost them to keep an apartment building to have these people in a home. So yes, a little bit of cost, sure. I mean, that the social impact of that and the social gain on that is far more than whatever the cost would be. I hope as a sitting member of the Board of Estimates, when we're looking at capital spending, and as a sitting member of the Board of Finance, when we're looking then at potential avenues of investment for city money, that's my plan. I want to bring new things to the table. I want to be able to share new ideas and share new possibilities of ways of doing that, helping all citizens throughout the city, and addressing issues that we haven't looked at in a long time.
And then just because you've mentioned it, let me ask, as a candidate right now, are there alternative revenue streams or things that you're already prepared to recommend to the city to pursue?
In terms of alternative revenue, it's hard to say, because again, I don't know what our agencies are really doing.
Who does?
So, it's, again, and I have to be careful too. Look, I'm very optimistic. I'm incredibly optimistic. I see so much opportunity within the role of the comptroller, within the office, and the sub-offices underneath of it. So I do, I get over my skis sometimes. But then, like the operation side of me brings me back, and it says, well, wait a minute, look, audits. We have, hello? Is that for me? But no, it's so difficult. The other things that we've talked about, the opportunities that are out there. Again, Roberto, it's so difficult. We can talk about that. We have to get a base mark. We have to know what we're spending, why we're spending it, what it's doing for us. We have to know that. And we can't wait. I wanted to bring this up too, the quadrennial audits. I really, the more I've learned about those, look, the city called for audits. The citizens called for audits. We had council members that were calling for audits. The problem is that with the quadrennial audits, I really think that was a Band-Aid. That was a way of saying, well, no, here's your audits. We're looking then at audits from 4 years ago. Like, there's no way that we can determine if we're doing things correctly and if money's being spent correctly if we're looking at 4 years in the past. And then even around the commitment around performing those quadrennial audits, we still have 10 that need to be completed before December of this year. So we've had 4 years to get 13 audits done, and there's 3 performed by outside auditors. So, I'm going to bring a commitment to audits to the city, and I'm hoping then, once, and I'm not hoping, I'm confident that once the audits are in place, it's going to open up a lot of different new potential revenue sources. It's going to open up a lot of new, sort of almost like, where was this money at? And, from a revenue, potentially not a revenue source, but just the tax dollars that I really believe, and I'm confident that having fiscal audits annually, the tax dollars that's going to be saved, you want to get pie in the sky. The idea of property taxes if we want to get our property taxes down, we need to do financial auditing. We need to do fiscal auditing so we know how much of our $2.6 billion city budget is being spent correctly. Then we can talk about lowering property taxes. And that's sort of the end goal. It's looking at using the money in the correct way and then finding ways then to ensure that our citizens are paying only what they need to pay.
I really appreciate your being here today. We've been here almost an hour, and you've had to handle the entire weight of the forum questions. So let me just give you an opportunity to give a closing statement about your race for office of the Comptroller.
Well, I will say, and thank you so much. I haven't had a lot of opportunities throughout this campaign to speak about my platform. The opportunities I have had, ones that I've discussed with individuals that, organizers of events, and a number of events have contacted me directly. When I am sharing my platform, my vision for the future of the Comptroller's office, as well as, how the Comptroller's office can do some of the heavy lifting to move our city forward, the feedback is phenomenal. And again, I'm doing a lot. I think a lot of people, for too long, they don't understand or they haven't been informed of the power that is in the Comptroller's office, what your Comptroller should be doing for you as an elected official, and then sort of the future outlook on what the Comptroller could be doing down the road to make the city better. That's my platform. I want to come in. I want to get annual performance and financial audits throughout every city agency, have that within my first 3 years. I'm looking at really getting the Department of Real Estate back to work. I'm looking at improving and really, in some cases, just allowing transparency and more of an investment and a back and forth with the citizens in terms of the Comptroller's office. I'm going to have, recurring, not even events, but going out to community association meetings, myself and members of my staff. I want to make sure that everybody knows what their department of the Comptroller, or what their office of the Comptroller is doing, how the decisions that I'm making are impacting them, and why I'm making those decisions. And I want the feedback from the community around that. My vote on the Board of Estimates is incredibly important. My say in the Board of Finance is incredibly important. I want the citizens to know that I'm hearing them when I'm making my decisions, when I'm making my votes. And as I'll leave it at this. We're at a real turning point in Baltimore's future. With the elections that are going on right now, and the incredible amount of candidates that are out there that are looking for positive change and bringing new ideas to the table. I just ask that everyone that has yet to vote, that they truly take the time to look at the candidates, all candidates. Take the time to look at my platform. Take the time to look at what I stand for, what I'm going to do, and then make your decision. And again, I thank you, Roberto. I thank everybody in the audience. I thank you on Facebook. If you choose to, I'm at www.electmikeking.com. Email me if you have other questions. It's mike@electmikeking.com. And I'm really, really excited about the next few weeks.
Excellent. I'd like to thank Gus Sentimentes for live streaming this. Gus Sentimentes of City Explainer, live streaming this for the Baltimore Election 2016 Facebook group. I'd like to thank once again the Downtown Cultural Arts Center for providing us the space to hold this forum. And I'd like to thank our audience here as well as online, and Mr. Mike King, candidate for office of the Comptroller. Thank you very much.